Commander Zethka stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the human space station with 4 arms crossed behind his back. His purple skin gleamed under the bright lights as he looked around with golden eyes. The Veltari officer had inspected weapons systems across 47 different species in the Galactic Council. Today was his first time seeing human military technology up close. Admiral Chen waited at the docking bay. She was a small woman with gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Her uniform was simple and practical, nothing like the decorated robes that other species wore. She smiled and held out her hand. "Welcome to Defense Station Olympus, Commander Zethka. I'm Admiral Chen. I hope your journey was comfortable." Zethka looked at the offered hand for a moment before shaking it with one of his 4 arms. Human customs were strange, but the Council required him to be polite. "Thank you, Admiral. The Council is very interested in seeing your weapons systems. Your species has been part of the galactic community for only 50 years, but your technology advancement has been remarkable." Chen nodded and started walking down a long corridor. The walls were metal, with simple lighting. No fancy decorations or expensive materials like on Veltari ships. "We're honored by the inspection, Commander. Though I should warn you, some of our equipment might seem a bit old-fashioned compared to what you're used to." They passed several human soldiers along the way. Zethka noticed they carried energy rifles similar to what most species used, but also had strange metal devices on their belts. Some had long knives attached to their weapons. Why would an advanced species still carry sharp metal when energy weapons could cut through almost anything? The first stop was the main armory. Chen pressed her palm against a scanner, and thick doors slid open. Inside, Zethka saw rows upon rows of weapons. Many were energy-based plasma rifles and particle cannons that looked normal enough, but mixed in were things that made no sense. "These are projectile weapons," Chen explained, picking up a device that looked crude compared to the sleek energy weapons. "We call this one an assault rifle. It fires small metal bullets using chemical explosives." Zethka's golden eyes widened. "Chemical explosives? But Admiral, why would you use such primitive methods when you have plasma technology? The energy output is far more efficient." Chen smiled and set the weapon back down. "That's what everyone asks. These rifles have been with us for centuries. We've improved them over time, but the basic idea remains the same." They moved deeper into the armory. Zethka saw things that completely confused him. Weapons that shot metal spikes using magnetic fields. Devices that launched explosive shells over long distances. Even stranger, there were racks of swords, knives, and axes made from advanced metals. "Admiral, I must ask directly, why do you maintain these obsolete weapons? Your plasma rifles are quite advanced. Your energy shields work well, but you waste space and resources on equipment that any first-year academy student would call primitive." Chen picked up a knife and tested its edge with her thumb. "Commander, how many different species have you fought in actual combat?" The question surprised Zethka. "I am an inspector, not a soldier. The Veltari have been at peace for over 200 years. Our weapons are primarily for defense against pirates and wild animals on new worlds. Humans have been fighting each other for our entire history," Chen said quietly. "We've used every type of weapon you can imagine. Rocks, spears, swords, guns, missiles, energy weapons, even our bare hands. Each weapon was perfect for certain situations and useless in others." She led him to another section where larger weapons were stored. Massive cannons that clearly fired physical projectiles. Missile systems with warheads that looked chemical rather than energy-based. These ship-mounted railguns can fire tungsten slugs at 30% of light speed, Chen explained. No energy signature to track, no heat bloom to detect, just a piece of metal moving very fast. Zethka calculated the numbers in his head. The kinetic energy would be enormous. But surely plasma cannons are more versatile. Against most targets, Yes. But what if you fought an enemy with perfect energy absorption? What if their shields were specifically designed to stop particle beams and plasma bolts? That's theoretical, Zethka said. No such species exists in Council space. Chen stopped walking and turned to face him. Commander, space is big. Really big. Humans have only explored a tiny corner of this galaxy. We've met maybe 24 intelligent species so far. How many do you think are out there that we haven't encountered? Zethka had to admit he didn't know. The Council controlled thousands of star systems, but that was still a small fraction of the galaxy. Every human military officer studies something we call redundancy, Chen continued. If one system fails, you have another. If one weapon doesn't work, you try a different one. We keep old weapons because someday we might face an enemy where our newest technology is useless. They visited the training areas next. Human soldiers practiced with both energy weapons and projectile weapons. Some trained in hand-to-hand combat, using knives and even bare hands. Zethka watched a training exercise where soldiers had to complete a mission using only primitive weapons after their energy systems failed. This seems inefficient, Zethka observed. Training time spent on obsolete weapons could be used to master advanced systems. Maybe, Chen agreed. But tell me, Commander, what happens if your soldiers' energy weapons stop working? If their plasma rifles run out of power or get damaged? Zethka thought about it. Veltari soldiers would be nearly helpless without their primary weapons. They trained briefly with backup energy weapons, but nothing beyond that. The tour ended in Chen's office, overlooking the station's main hangar. Through the large windows, they could see human ships being loaded with supplies. Zethka noticed the ships carried both energy weapons and what humans called kinetic systems. Admiral, I will report that your weapons are functional and well-maintained, Zethka said formally. But I must note that your adherence to primitive technology is unusual among Council species. Chen poured 2 cups of tea and offered one to Zethka. Commander, humans have a saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We hope we never need our old weapons, but if the day comes when our energy weapons fail us, we'll be ready. Zethka accepted the tea and sipped it thoughtfully. It was pleasant, though he still didn't understand human logic. As he prepared his report that evening, he made notes about human inefficiency and their strange attachment to obsolete technology. He recommended that the Council encourage humans to focus more on advanced weapons systems. He had no way of knowing that in 3 months, his report would be completely forgotten. Because in 3 months, humanity's obsolete weapons would save the entire Galactic Council from destruction. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything Zethka had ever seen. Council members from dozens of species filled the great chamber, their voices creating a chaos of different languages and frequencies. Fear filled the air, like a thick fog. Chancellor Vexrin of the Althari stood at the center podium, her blue crystalline skin flickering with stress patterns. Order! We must have order, she called out. But her voice could barely be heard over the panic. Zethka sat in the Veltari section, his forearms trembling slightly as he read the latest reports on his datapad. The outer colonies were gone. 12 worlds in 3 different systems had gone completely silent in the past 2 weeks. When scout ships finally reached those areas, they found empty planets with no signs of life. The enemy has been identified, Chancellor Vexrin announced as the chamber slowly quieted. They call themselves the Korthax Swarm. They appear to be a collective intelligence, made up of billions of individual organisms. A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber. The image showed creatures that made Zethka's skin crawl. They looked like insects the size of ground vehicles, with 6 legs and mandibles that could crush metal. Their shells had a strange shimmer, like oil on water. Each individual creature is approximately 3 meters long, the Chancellor continued. They travel in groups of millions, consuming all organic matter on each planet before moving to the next system. Our xenobiology teams believe they are a hive mind, controlled by larger queen organisms. Admiral Korvash of the Ternan Fleet Command stood up. His red, armored hide showed old battle scars from conflicts with pirates. What are their military capabilities? How do we fight them? The image changed to show a recording from one of the attacked colonies. Zethka watched in horror as thousands of the creatures swarmed over the colony's defense shields. Energy weapons fired continuously from the human settlement's walls. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and quantum disruptors all struck the creatures directly. Nothing happened. The energy weapons passed right through the creatures' shells like they were shooting at empty air. The creatures never even slowed down. They climbed over the walls and disappeared into the colony buildings. The recording ended when the camera was destroyed. How is this possible? Someone shouted from the Quantar section. No organism should be immune to plasma weapons. Dr. Yilneth, the Council's chief scientist, moved to the podium. Her tentacles waved nervously as she spoke. We've analyzed recovered shell fragments. The creature's outer layer appears to be a bioelectric membrane. It absorbs and redirects energy weapons completely. Our most advanced plasma cannons are useless against them. The chamber erupted in frightened voices again. Energy weapons were the foundation of galactic military technology. Every species had used them for centuries. If the swarm was immune to energy weapons, how could they be stopped? What about the colony's kinetic defenses? Admiral Korvash asked. Projectile weapons? Chemical explosives? The outer colonies didn't have many such weapons, Doctor. Yilneth replied sadly. Most species phased out primitive weapons decades ago. The few kinetic weapons that were fired seemed to damage the creatures, but there weren't enough to make a difference. Chancellor Vexrin called for quiet again. Fleet Command has prepared a defensive plan. Admiral Korvash will coordinate our forces at the Zerion system. We'll make our stand there before the swarm can reach the inner worlds. Over the next week, Zethka watched the largest military fleet in galactic history assemble at Zerion. 300 ships from 20 different species, all armed with the most advanced energy weapons available. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, quantum disruptors that could tear apart matter at the molecular level, particle beams that could slice through any known material. Zethka was aboard the Veltari command ship when the swarm arrived. Long-range sensors detected them first, a dark cloud moving between the outer planets of the system. As they got closer, the true size of the enemy became clear. Millions of creatures flew through space without ships, somehow surviving in the vacuum. Their bioelectric shells created an aurora effect that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The cloud of creatures stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. All ships, prepare to fire, Admiral Korvash ordered over the fleet communications. Target the leading edge of the formation. Maximum power to all weapon systems. The space around Zerion lit up like a star as 300 ships fired at once. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and energy weapons of every type streaked toward the approaching swarm. The light was so bright that viewing screens had to dim automatically to protect the crew's eyes. The weapons struck the creatures head-on in a display that should have vaporized them instantly. Instead, their shells simply absorbed the energy and continued moving. Not a single creature was destroyed. The entire massive barrage had accomplished nothing. Impossible, whispered Captain Gorthak from his position next to Zethka. Our weapons should have destroyed them completely. All ships, continue firing, Admiral Korvash ordered. But Zethka could hear the panic in his voice. Increase power to weapons. Try alternating frequencies. For 6 hours, the galactic fleet poured energy weapons into the swarm. They tried every type of energy weapon known to science. They adjusted frequencies, power levels, and firing patterns. Nothing worked. The creatures absorbed everything and kept coming. When the swarm reached the fleet, the real horror began. The creatures swarmed over the ships like insects on food. They used their mandibles to tear through hull armor that was designed to withstand plasma cannons. Ships began exploding as the creatures reached their power cores. "Fleet command to all ships." Admiral Korvash's voice was full of defeat. "General retreat. All ships retreat immediately." Zethka watched through the command ship's windows as dozens of vessels were overrun. The creatures moved with purpose and intelligence, targeting weapon systems and command centers first. Within hours, half the fleet was destroyed or disabled. The Veltari command ship jumped to hyperspace, along with the other surviving vessels. Behind them, the Korthax swarm continued toward the inner systems of the galaxy. Unstoppable. In the days that followed, 3 more worlds fell to the swarm. The Council was in complete panic. Their most advanced weapons were useless. Their greatest military minds had no answers. Fear spread through every civilized system as news of the defeats reached them. Zethka sat in his quarters, staring at his old inspection reports. His report on human weapons seemed like a joke now. He had criticized their primitive projectile weapons and obsolete kinetic systems. He had recommended that humans focus on more advanced energy weapons, like everyone else. Now he wondered if the humans had known something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. As he reviewed the battle recordings, he noticed something. The few kinetic weapons that had been used against the swarm had actually hurt the creatures. Not many, but some. A message appeared on his communication screen. "Emergency council session in 2 hours. All available military personnel to attend." As Zethka prepared to leave his quarters, he made a decision. He was going to recommend that the council contact the humans. Maybe their obsolete weapons weren't so obsolete after all. The emergency council session was smaller this time. Many species had recalled their representatives to prepare their home worlds for evacuation. Only the core members remained, and fear had replaced panic in their voices. Chancellor Vexrin looked exhausted as she called for order. "We've lost contact with 4 more systems. The Korthax swarm continues to move toward the inner galaxy. Our fleets cannot stop them." Zethka stood up from his seat in the Veltari section. "Chancellor, I request permission to speak." "The floor recognizes Commander Zethka," she replied with tired formality. Zethka's 4 arms were steady now. His fear had turned into determination. 3 months ago, I inspected human weapons systems. I criticized their use of what I called primitive technology. I believe I was wrong. The chamber was completely quiet. Every species representative focused on his words. The humans maintain large numbers of kinetic weapons, projectile rifles, explosive missiles, magnetic railguns. I thought this was inefficient and obsolete. But in reviewing the battle recordings from our defeated colonies, I noticed that kinetic weapons were the only things that damaged the swarm creatures. Admiral Korvash, whose scales were now dull with stress, spoke from his section. "Commander, we tried everything. Energy weapons of every type failed completely." "Yes, Admiral. But we didn't try kinetic weapons because most of our species no longer have them. The humans do. In large quantities." "Doctor." Yilneth activated her communication device. "According to our files, humans were not part of the defense fleet at Zirion. Their military claimed they were, conducting training exercises." Chancellor Vexrin's crystalline skin flickered with hope. "Contact the human delegation immediately." Within an hour, Admiral Chen appeared on the main communication screen. She was in what looked like a ship's command center, with human officers working at control stations behind her. "Chancellor, council members," Chen said with a respectful nod, "we're sorry to hear about your losses against this new enemy." "Admiral Chen," Chancellor Vexrin began, "we need your help. Our energy weapons cannot harm these creatures, but we believe your kinetic weapons might be effective." Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Chancellor, what exactly are you asking?" "We need human ships and weapons to join our defense," Admiral Korvash said urgently. "The swarm will reach the core systems within days." "Admiral, With respect, your fleets have hundreds of ships with weapons far more advanced than ours. If your energy weapons failed, why do you think our older technology would work? Zethka moved closer to the communication screen. Admiral, this is Commander Zethka. I inspected your weapon systems. You told me that humans prepare for different types of enemies. You said someday you might face a foe where your newest technology wouldn't work. Chen smiled slightly. I remember our conversation, Commander. You seemed skeptical at the time. I was wrong. These creatures are immune to energy weapons. But in the battle recordings, projectile weapons damaged them. You have projectile weapons. Chen nodded slowly. We do. And we've been watching the situation develop. Our scientists have analyzed the data from the attacks. The creature's bioelectric shells can absorb and redirect energy, but they're still made of physical matter. Kinetic weapons should be very effective. Then you'll help us? Chancellor Vexrin asked. Chancellor, the human fleet has been preparing since the first reports of the swarm reached us. We're already on our way to intercept them at the Helix Nebula. The communication screen changed to show a tactical display. Zethka was amazed by what he saw. 50 human ships moving in formation through space, but these ships looked different from what he remembered. We've retrofitted our vessels with additional kinetic weapons, Chen explained. Railguns, missile pods, and magnetic accelerators. Some of our older ships were designed specifically for kinetic warfare. Quote, Admiral Korvash studied the tactical display. Admiral Chen, 50 ships against millions of creatures? That seems insufficient. John's son, Admiral, humans have been fighting outnumbered for our entire history. We've learned that the right weapon at the right time is worth more than 1,000 wrong weapons. The human fleet reached the Helix Nebula 2 days before the swarm arrived. Chen had invited council observers to witness the engagement, so Zethka found himself aboard a human command ship called the Perseverance. The ship was different from any vessel he'd been on before. Instead of sleek energy weapon ports, the hull was covered with angular railgun turrets and missile launch tubes. The command center was practical and functional, with screens showing ammunition counts instead of energy levels. Contact, reported a human officer. Swarm formations detected at the edge of the nebula. Estimated numbers in the millions. Chen stood at the center of the command area, completely calm. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Remember your training. These creatures can absorb energy, but they can't absorb mass. Target the dense formations first. Fire, when ready. The first salvo from the human fleet was unlike anything Zethka had ever seen. Instead of bright energy beams, the weapons fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds. Railguns launched tungsten slugs that were invisible until they struck their targets. Missile pods released clouds of explosive warheads that detonated in proximity to the creatures. The effect was immediate and devastating. Where energy weapons had been completely useless, the kinetic weapons tore through the swarm formations like paper. Creatures that had absorbed plasma bolts without damage were ripped apart by simple metal projectiles moving at high speed. Direct hits on the leading formations, the weapons officer reported. Enemy casualties estimated at 60,000 and rising. Zethka watched the tactical display as red dots representing swarm creatures began disappearing in large numbers. For the first time since the crisis began, an enemy attack was being stopped. They're trying to surround us, another officer called out. Let them, Chen replied. All ships, pattern Delta. The human ships moved into a formation that put the swarm creatures in the middle of overlapping fields of fire. Kinetic weapons struck from multiple directions, making it impossible for the creatures to find cover. Explosive shells created chain reactions that destroyed hundreds of creatures at once. Admiral, Chen's communication officer spoke up. We're receiving a transmission from the swarm. It's in standard galactic language. Put it through, Chen ordered. A voice filled the command center. speaking in a tone that suggested multiple minds working together. Human vessels. We are the Korthax Collective. Your weapons cause us pain. This is new. We wish to understand. Chen stepped forward. This is Admiral Chen of the Human Federation Fleet. You have attacked and destroyed peaceful colonies. We're here to stop you. We consume. It is our nature. Your species uses weapons that we cannot absorb. How is this possible? We have consumed 37 species across this galaxy. All used energy weapons that fed us strength. You made a mistake, Chen said simply. You assumed that energy weapons were the only weapons. Humans know better. The communication ended abruptly. On the tactical display, the remaining swarm creatures began to retreat toward deep space. For the first time in the galaxy's recorded history, the Korthax swarm had been defeated in battle. Zethka looked around the human command center. These people had just accomplished what the combined might of the Galactic Council could not. And they had done it with weapons that most species considered primitive and obsolete. Admiral Chen noticed his expression. Commander, you look surprised. Admiral, I need to apologize. When I inspected your weapons, I called them obsolete. I was completely wrong. Chen smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Commander, they are obsolete for fighting most enemies. But today, we faced an enemy that made our newest weapons useless and our oldest weapons priceless. That's why we keep both. The battle in the Helix Nebula was not over. While the main swarm had retreated, smaller groups of creatures continued to attack human ships. Zethka found himself in the perfect position to observe how humans actually fought. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV called Lieutenant Park from the sensor station. She was young with short black hair and moved with quick efficiency. Swarm cluster. Approximately 5,000 creatures. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display. Distance? 40,000 kilometers and closing. They're moving in a spiral pattern, trying to avoid our main guns. Zethka watched Chen think. Her face showed no fear. Only calculation. Captain Rivera, take us to intercept. Weapons. Prepare cluster munitions. Let's teach these creatures about human creativity. The Perseverance turned toward the incoming creatures. As they got closer, Zethka could see them through the main viewing screen. The creatures moved through space like a school of deadly fish, their bioelectric shells creating waves of light. 40 kilometers, Lieutenant Park reported. Entering weapons range. Fire cluster munitions, Chen ordered. The ship's missile tubes launched what looked like normal warheads. But as they approached the swarm cluster, the missiles split apart into hundreds of smaller projectiles. Each small projectile exploded near the creatures, creating clouds of metal fragments that shredded their shells. Direct hits. Enemy formation broken, the weapons officer reported with satisfaction. But instead of retreating, the surviving creatures changed their approach. They began moving erratically, making them harder to target with the larger weapons. They're learning, Chen observed. Tactical adaptation. Impressive for a hive mind. Admiral, Zethka said quietly, how can you be so calm? These creatures destroyed our entire fleet. Chen looked at him with eyes that held years of experience. Commander, this is what humans do. We fight. We adapt. We overcome. These creatures are dangerous. But they're not the first impossible enemy we've faced. The creatures continued their approach, now spread out in a pattern that made the ship's railguns less effective. Chen studied their movement for several minutes. They're trying to get close enough to board us, she realized. Lieutenant Park? How long until they reach boarding range? 8 minutes at their current speed. Perfect. Weapons. Load the special rounds Captain Nakamura developed. Let's see if these creatures understand the concept of surprise. Zethka watched the human crew work with calm efficiency. No panic, no fear, just professional competence. The weapons officer loaded different ammunition into the railguns, rounds that looked more complex than the simple tungsten slugs used earlier. 6 minutes to boarding range, Park reported. Fire special rounds, wide dispersal pattern, Chen ordered. The railguns fired projectiles that looked normal until they reached the creature formation. Then each round exploded into an expanding net of metal cables. The creatures flew directly into the nets and became entangled. Unable to maneuver, they became easy targets for the ship's secondary weapons. All hostiles neutralized, the weapons officer reported. Zethka was amazed. Admiral, how did you know that would work? Commander, humans have been using nets to catch flying things for thousands of years. The principle doesn't change just because you're in space. Over the next several hours, Zethka witnessed something remarkable. Each time the swarm creatures tried a new attack pattern, the humans found a way to counter it. When the creatures spread out to avoid explosions, humans used precision weapons. When they clustered together for protection, humans used area effect weapons. When they tried to hide in asteroid fields, humans used weapons that could track their heat signatures. Admiral Chen, Zethka said during a brief pause in the fighting, "May I ask you something?" "Of course, Commander. When my people fought, we always tried to use our most advanced weapons first. Maximum firepower, latest technology. But humans seem to think about each situation differently." Chen nodded and moved to a tactical display showing the battle area. "Commander, let me ask you something. If you had one type of weapon that worked perfectly against every enemy, what would happen if you met an enemy that weapon couldn't hurt?" "We would be defenseless," Zethka admitted. "Exactly. Humans learned long ago that there is no perfect weapon. Every tool has limitations. So we keep many different tools and learn when to use each one." She pointed to different parts of the tactical display. "Against these creatures in open space, we use railguns for long-range kills. In asteroid fields, we use guided missiles that can navigate around obstacles. When they try to board our ships, we have close-range weapons and even hand-to-hand combat training. But that seems inefficient. Why not just focus on making better energy weapons?" "Because better doesn't always mean different, Commander. These creatures are immune to energy weapons. It doesn't matter how much better we make our plasma cannons. Better isn't always the answer. Different is." Lieutenant Park interrupted their conversation. "Admiral, we're receiving a communication from the retreating swarm. They want to talk again." "Put them through," Chen ordered. The same collective voice filled the command center. "Human Admiral Chen, we have observed your combat methods. You use many different weapons in ways we did not expect. We wish to understand your tactical thinking." Chen stepped forward. "What do you want to know? Why do you maintain weapons that are less efficient than your energy-based systems? Your kinetic weapons require more space, more maintenance, more resources. Yet they are effective against us when your better weapons are not." "Because efficiency isn't everything," Chen replied. "Humans learned that the best weapon is the one that works against your current enemy. We keep old weapons because someday we might face an enemy where our new weapons don't work. This is inefficient thinking. Is it? Your species dominated this galaxy because you were immune to energy weapons. Every species you encountered used the same type of weapons, so you were unstoppable. But because humans kept inefficient weapons, we could fight you." There was a long pause before the swarm responded. "We have not encountered this type of strategic thinking before. Most species optimize for current threats. You prepare for unknown threats. 1. In the down you are." "That's correct. This suggests that humans expect to face enemies you have never encountered before. We do. The galaxy is vast and full of unknowns. We prepare for possibilities, not just probabilities." Another pause. "We understand now why your species maintains obsolete weapons. It is not inefficient. It is survival preparation for infinite unknown variables. Now you're learning, Chen said with a slight smile. We withdraw from this galaxy. Your species has shown us that our immunity to energy weapons is not absolute dominance. There may be other species with different weapons we have not considered. That's a wise decision. Before we leave, we must ask, how many different types of weapons do humans possess? Chen looked around the command center at her crew. How many different ways are there to hurt something? The communication ended. On the tactical displays, the remaining swarm creatures began moving away from galactic space, toward the empty regions between galaxies. Zethka stared at Admiral Chen with new understanding. Admiral, when you told me that humans prepare for anything, you really meant anything. Commander, the universe is infinite and full of surprises. The species that survives is not the one with the best weapons. It's the one with the most options. As the human fleet regrouped after the battle, Zethka realized that he was witnessing something historic. Not just the defeat of an unstoppable enemy, but the revelation of a completely different approach to survival. Humans didn't try to build the perfect weapon. They built many imperfect weapons and learned when to use each one. It was, he realized, the wisdom of expecting the unexpected. 6 months after the defeat of the Korthax swarm, Zethka found himself back on Defense Station Olympus. But this time, he wasn't alone. Representatives from 23 different species had come to learn about human weapons and tactics. Admiral Chen greeted the group in the same simple way she had greeted Zethka the first time. Her gray hair was a bit more silver now, and she had a new medal on her uniform that the Council had given her after the battle. Welcome to Olympus Station, everyone. I know you've all come a long way to be here. The group was impressive. Admiral Korvash represented the Ternan fleet. Dr. Yilneth had come to study human weapons technology. Even Chancellor Vexrin had made the journey personally. Each species had sent their best military minds to understand what they now called the human way. Admiral, said General Thokmor of the Quantar military, our species has used energy weapons for over 400 years. We're finding it difficult to change our entire military doctrine. Chen nodded as she led them toward the armory. General, we're not suggesting you abandon energy weapons. We're suggesting you add options. The armory looked different now. The human weapons were still there, but new sections had been added. Weapons designed by other species, using kinetic principles. Energy weapons modified to work alongside projectile systems. The room buzzed with activity as human and alien engineers worked together. This is a Veltari kinetic rifle, Chen explained, picking up a weapon that combined Zethka's species' four-armed design with human projectile technology. Commander Zethka worked with our engineers to adapt the concept for your physiology. Zethka felt proud as he demonstrated the weapon. 6 months ago, he would have been embarrassed to be associated with primitive technology. Now he understood that diversity was strength. Dr. Yilneth's tentacles moved excitedly as she examined a new type of ammunition. Admiral, these rounds are fascinating. They're designed to be effective against energy-absorbing organisms, but they can also damage conventional targets. We call them adaptive rounds, Chen explained. They change their function based on what they hit. Dense armor gets penetrating cores. Energy-absorbing materials get kinetic fragmentation. Soft targets get expanding rounds. Chancellor Vexerin stepped forward, her crystalline skin showing patterns of curiosity. Admiral, may I ask a philosophical question? Of course, Chancellor. When humans developed these weapons, did you know you would someday face enemies immune to energy weapons? Chen smiled. No, Chancellor. We had no idea the Korthax swarm existed. But we knew that someday we would face something we hadn't prepared for. So we prepared for everything we could think of. Even things that seemed unlikely, especially things that seemed unlikely. In human military history, the most dangerous enemies were always the ones we didn't expect. They moved to the training areas where mixed species groups were learning human tactics. Zethka watched a Turnan soldier practice switching between energy weapons and kinetic weapons based on target type. The soldier's movements were still awkward, but he was learning. "This is harder than we expected," Admiral Korvash admitted. "Our soldiers are trained to rely on one primary weapon system. Teaching them to use multiple systems is challenging. It takes time," Chen agreed. "Human soldiers train with dozens of different weapons, but you don't need to master everything immediately. Start with one backup system and build from there." Captain Rivera, who had fought in the Helix Nebula battle, was teaching a group of alien officers about tactical flexibility. "The key is not having the perfect weapon," she explained. "The key is having the right weapon for the situation you're actually in." A young Althari officer raised her arm. "Captain, how do you know which weapon to use?" "Experience and training," Rivera replied. "But also, willingness to change your plan when it's not working. If your first approach fails, try something different immediately." Chancellor Vexrin observed the training with fascination. "Admiral Chen, this approach requires a different mindset than most species are used to. We typically focus on perfecting our strengths. Humans seem to focus on covering their weaknesses. Both are important, Chancellor, but covering weaknesses often matters more in combat. An enemy will always attack your weak points, not your strong ones." They visited the weapons development lab next. Human and alien scientists worked side by side, creating hybrid weapon systems. Zethka was amazed to see a plasma rifle that could also launch kinetic projectiles, and a railgun that could fire energy-charged rounds. Dr. Yilneth was in intense discussion with a human scientist about something called variable ammunition. The concept involved rounds that could change their properties after being fired, adapting to whatever they encountered. "The philosophical implications are significant," Dr. Yilneth explained to the group. "Most species develop weapons to counter known threats. Humans develop weapons to counter unknown threats. This requires fundamentally different thinking." General Thakmor tested a kinetic weapon designed for Quantar physiology. His accuracy was poor, but he was determined to learn. "Admiral, how long did it take humans to develop this tactical flexibility?" Chen thought about the question. "General, humans have been fighting for our entire history. Every war taught us something new about weapons and tactics. We've had thousands of years to learn that no single approach works for everything. Most species achieved peace after joining the galactic community," Chancellor Vexrin observed. "We stopped developing new weapons because we didn't need them." "That makes sense," Chen replied. "But it also made you vulnerable to unexpected threats. Peace is wonderful, but preparation for war can sometimes preserve peace." As the day continued, Zethka noticed something interesting. The alien representatives were not just learning about weapons. They were learning about the human approach to problem solving. Humans didn't just ask, "What's the best solution?" They asked, "What if the best solution doesn't work?" During the final briefing, Chancellor Vexrin addressed the group. "What we've learned here goes beyond military technology. The humans have shown us the value of maintaining options, of preparing for uncertainty, of expecting the unexpected." Admiral Chen stood before the assembled representatives. 6 months ago, Commander Zethka criticized our use of obsolete weapons. He wasn't wrong. From his perspective, our kinetic weapons are less efficient than energy weapons for most purposes. But efficiency isn't everything. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. "Space is vast and full of unknowns. Today we defeated the Korthax swarm. Tomorrow we might face something completely different. The species that survives will be the one that's ready for anything." General Thakmor raised a question. "Admiral, are you suggesting that all species should abandon efficiency in favor of redundancy?" "Not abandon, General. Balance. Efficiency is important, but so is adaptability. The goal is to be prepared without being paranoid. Ready, without being wasteful." As the gathering ended, Each species representative left with plans to modify their military doctrines. Some would add kinetic weapons to their fleets. Others would develop hybrid systems. All would train their forces to think more flexibly. Zethka remained behind to speak with Admiral Chen privately. Admiral, I want to thank you for showing me a different way of thinking. Commander, you learned quickly. Your people's adaptation of kinetic weapons has been impressive. I've been wondering about something. When I first inspected your weapons, you knew I would think they were obsolete. Why didn't you explain their importance then? Chen smiled. Would you have believed me? Sometimes, people need to see the value of something before they can understand it. Zethka realized she was right. 6 months ago, he would have dismissed any explanation about the value of primitive weapons. Only seeing them in action had convinced him. Admiral, do you think the galaxy will face other threats like the Korthax swarm? Probably, Chen replied without hesitation. But next time, we'll be ready. And the time after that, we'll be ready for something else entirely. As Zethka prepared to leave the station, he reflected on what he had learned. They had taught everyone a new way of thinking about preparedness and survival. The galaxy was vast and full of unknowns. But now, thanks to human wisdom about expecting the unexpected, the civilized species would be ready for whatever came next. They would maintain their advanced energy weapons, but they would also keep simpler alternatives. They would optimize for efficiency, but also prepare for the day when efficiency wasn't enough. The day the aliens discovered why humans still hold on to obsolete weapons had become the day the galaxy learned that sometimes the old ways might save you when the new ways fail. In an infinite universe, preparation for anything was the only sensible approach to survival.